Hi, I'm Mark Wilhelm. I'm a content writer and content marketer at Tetra Prime Consulting.
Hi, I'm Aaron Garner. I'm the CEO of Tetra Prime Consulting, and I believe that storytelling is a core competency for any marketer.
Hi, I'm Rachel Tyndall. I'm a writer and content marketer at Tetra Prime as well. And so in Storynomics, stage 6 is defined as the first reaction, the violation of expectation. Essentially, it's the point where the character or protagonist takes the first calculated action and either gets a different or a more powerful result than expected. Obviously, this causes surprise and typically insight as well. So there are several key pieces of information that you need to know about before you can really understand the significance of the first reaction. The first is a term called the forces of antagonism, which are negative obstacles that arise out of conflict, whether it's physical or situational. There are four forces that we're going to talk about briefly: physical, social, personal, and inner. So physical obstacles include things like time, space, and objects. For instance, not having enough time to complete a task or a natural disaster. Um, Social obstacles are those that come from institutions and individuals, things like government, religious organizations, and hospitals. Social obstacles also might include things like moving through the social ranks, becoming popular at school, fitting in at work, things like that. Personal obstacles are those that come from the pleasure and pain of relationships. For example, problematic relationships among family and friends, or struggling to make new friends. And finally, inner obstacles are those that happen within individuals, things like changes in the body, changes in the mind, emotions. Also, conscious and subconscious desires. For instance, how to deal with it when your emotions overcome common sense. I know that's a lot to take in, but there is one other important piece that you need to know about the first reaction, which is what a turning point is and how it works. So, Storynomics has a pretty good definition that I'd like to use because it's clear and precise. McKee defines a turning point as the precise moment where an unforeseen force of antagonism violates expectations and pivots values at stake from positive to negative or negative to positive. So, as we talked about before, the core value of a story is always going to be a binary like positive or negative. So, what the turning point does is flip flop the story from one side to another. It can do this in two ways. One, with the action and direct reaction, like consequences, or by revealing a secret or previously unknown information and the response to that new fact. Ideally, each scene pivots in one direction or the other, but it doesn't always work like that. These turning points merge our rational and emotional sides. On the rational side, turning points punch a hole in reality and make the audience ask questions like, why did things take that turn? Why didn't the character see that coming? They immediately try to remember what's happened up to this point and are delighted to figure it out. They want to learn without being taught. On the emotional side, however, emotions start as a reaction to being stimulated in a certain way. At our most basic level, we only really feel pleasure and pain, obviously, with there being a lot of complexity and variation within those. That's why two people could react completely differently to the same thing, or one person reacts in two different ways and has mixed emotions. McKee points out that emotion is a side effect of change, which makes sense when we think about turning points because each turning point marks a change. With all this in mind, there are several key turning points in Inside Out that are critical to understanding the story aspect of it. I'm going to pass the baton over to Mark to discuss the first reaction and turning point, when Bing Bong's wagon falls over the edge of the memory dump and sadness comforts him.
Thanks, Rachel, for that great setup and description of all the important key elements around action, reaction, and turning points. So, yes, like you said, the first really important turning point in Inside Out is when joy and sadness are traveling with Bing Bong. Um, Bing Bong was Riley's imaginary friend when she was a child, and he would like to get back to HQ in order that Riley might remember him and they can have some more adventures again and have fun. And he has a wagon that he and Riley used to play with when she was young that he calls his rocket. So as they're traveling through Imagination Land, his rocket gets knocked into Riley's memory dump, which is where Riley's memories go when she forgets them. So obviously, Bing Bong is pretty upset about this, and he sits down and he starts to cry because he feels defeated. He feels that maybe Riley should forget about him. He doesn't see a lot of hope in going on. So Joy, being Joy, tries to comfort him, but she says things like, "Oh, it'll be okay. Why don't you just, cheer up? We'll get to HQ and everything will be fine." But if anyone has ever tried to cheer you up that way when you were feeling down, you might know that is not a very effective strategy. So Joy is confused and doesn't know what to do. But Sadness walks over and sits down next to Bing Bong and just starts saying things like, "Oh, that was really awful that your rocket fell into the memory dump. I would feel really sad if that happened to me." And Bing Bong opens up and shares his feelings and starts to feel a little bit better. And starts to feel like maybe he can go on with Joy and Sadness. And Joy sees this and is very confused because up to this point, she has never seen Sadness do anything that she thought was helpful for Riley or helpful for anyone, really. So this scene was a big turning point for Joy and for the audience because we start to see that maybe there's something about Sadness that we didn't get at first. And maybe there's some value there that we just don't understand yet. So now I'm going to pass it over to Aaron to talk about the next big turning point in Inside Out.
Thank you, Mark. That was a good lead up to where we're at right now. And as Mark was saying, there are some things that are happening within the story that is changing Joy internally. She's beginning to see the value of Sadness. They're on the train of thought at this point, and they're heading back to HQ. They believe that the train of thought is they think that at this point it's their last hope for getting back to HQ. And the train of thought had stopped at a certain point, and Sadness had an idea to get it going again. Joy looks at Sadness and tells Sadness that she had a good idea for getting the train going again, and Sadness kind of looks at Joy with that sad yet half smile, and you can see that their relationship is starting to develop, that they're becoming more connected, and you can tell that Joy is really starting to have a deeper appreciation for Sadness. But at the same time, Riley's world is falling apart externally and therefore internally. And Family Island begins to fall. And as Family Island begins to fall, it brings down the train of thought. The passengers that were on the train of thought, so Sadness and Joy and all these guys, they narrowly escape. But in that process, they're in a very desperate state. They believe that their last hope for getting back to HQ is gone. So at this time, there's a memory recall tube that's recalling a memory, and Joy has this idea that maybe that they could get recalled too. So they run over to the memory recall tube, and just out of luck, it had popped open at that time. And Joy climbs into the memory recall tube, and Sadness begins to follow her to get into the recall tube as well. But when Sadness tries to get in, she touches one of the core memories, and it starts to turn blue. Joy looks at Sadness and pushes her away and says, "You're hurting Riley." At that point, Joy makes one of the most drastic and harsh decisions that she's made in the movie. She decides to betray Sadness. She pushes her out of the tube. She closes the tube, trying to save herself and thereby Riley's happiness. She begins to ascend inside the tube, but her attempt doesn't work. The tube breaks anyways, and she falls into the abyss. As she's falling in slow motion, you begin to see the camera cut between the external world of Riley and what's happening internal. You can see that as Riley's walking down a dark street, that she is becoming further and further separated from Joy. So by Joy's own actions, Riley is further from Joy than she has ever been.
Perfect. Thank you, Aaron. So the final turning point, as Aaron was saying, is the rock bottom for Joy. It's before we get to the ending, and Joy has fallen into the memory dump, where memories are forgotten. Um, and so Bing Bong falls into the memory dump with Joy, trying to save her, and essentially, he feels like they've already been forgotten. All of a sudden, Joy sees the sad core memory and picks it up. She starts crying, but just a little, and finds herself surrounded by happy memories of when Riley was a little girl. She said, I just wanted Riley to be happy. Her big moment of realization is when she picks up one of the happy core memories and a teardrop falls on it. So she wipes it off, and in wiping the tear off, she realizes that the memory has a sad side to it as well. She just didn't realize that before. So as she replays the memory from the beginning, she remembers Sadness talking about how Riley was sad that day. Joy just hadn't realized that before. As she watches the memory replay, a look of recognition blinks into her eyes. Joyce finally realized that Riley not only needs Sadness, but the Sadness has been there all along. She realizes that Riley's only happy when there's a balance. She needs both of them, joy and sadness. After that, Joy's urgency to get back up to headquarters to save Riley is renewed, with a catch. She needs to find Sadness and bring her back too.